Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. It's incredible to see such a full house standing a room. Apologies for those who are standing, but this is such an important topic, and to have a lot of interest in the topic really warms my heart. So thank you for being here. And because as we talk about long lives, I've had already a few numbers of years, and I'm not very social media friendly. So I'll remind myself right away to tell you, if you tweet or anything, it's hashtag WEF23, so that we can all connect the dots there. So the longevity economy is our topic today. As an actuary by trade, I've been fretting about changing the mindset around living longer lives. I have two little granddaughters, and they'll probably see the year 2100, which freaks me out a little bit, but it is what it is. And today, at my age, I'm one out of 10 people in the world as a over 60-year-old, but in less than 30 years from now, it'll be 1 out of 5. So just imagining the implication of all of this. And also that 80% of the older generation, older people, will be living in low to mid-level income countries by that time, as well as also a whole set of implications. So I'm excited to have a very interesting panel here with diverse background to talk about the topic today. And we will be looking at the implication for our work life, for our health, for our savings, for our social connection of living in the likelihood of over 100 years. The role of employers, the role of government, the role of banks and educators, insurers, and everything. So I have a few questions for the panelists, but really interested in the questions that are top of mind for you. So I'll open up for the audience midway through, and hopefully we have a good conversation going and spark great ideas for innovative ways to adapt to this new world of living longer. So let me introduce right away my panelists. Right here on my left is Desmond Lee, who's Minister for National Development and Minister in charge of Social Services Integration. He told me connecting the dots across the silos for the government of Singapore. Right by him is Lard Friese, who's the CEO and chairman of Aegon, who operates in the US as Transamerica, a very well-known name in both occasions. And Noura Berrouba, welcome as well, global shaper for the Stockholm Hub, which is an organization of people under 30. So we'll get that connection in today, which is exciting. Who are making an impact in the areas of justice, inclusion, and sustainability. And finally, a fellow Canadian, Darryl White, who's the CEO of the Bank of Montreal. A little bit bizarrely known, as we all know, given that you operate in the US, across Canada and across the US as well. So welcome, everyone. I'll start with a question for you, Desmond. Of course, sitting within an important government is doing quite well in terms of adapting to aging. What can you tell us that governments can do to adapt citizens to the reality of longer living?
Yes, thank you for having me on the panel, and I'm looking forward to learning from fellow panelists as well as from the audience. Singapore, as you know, is a small city-state. Population-wise, we have 2/3 the population of Switzerland, but 2% of the land mass. No natural resources, just our people and our savings and our investments to power us through. And we're a super age society. You gave some statistics earlier. By 2030, 1 in 5 globally. But today in Singapore, 1 in 7 of us is 65 and above. In 2030, it will be 1 in 4. 1/4 of us in Singapore will be 65 and above by the end of this decade. So it's just 7 more years to come. And we have been planning for this for a long time, making sure that we tackle the challenges of aging while ensuring intergenerational equity. Because aging, whether you like it or not, will cost a lot of resources, and it's balancing the books. You spend more on one, you may have to cut back on the other, and we can discuss later a little bit more about this. But from the government's point of view, I think it's important not just to look at it from a population point of view, but look at it from a life stages point of view. In Singapore, as well as in, I think, every part of the world, most people, including seniors, want to rely on themselves. They help themselves. If you can walk, you walk. If you can work, you work. I think most people are like that. And if you run into challenges, you would normally turn to your family. All right, turn to family as your first line of defense. And then the government and the community come in to enable, not to disable, but to enable the individual, the family, and the community to provide care. And so you think about it from life stages. You see seniors as we grow older, able-bodied, good health, working or volunteering. And then over time, you start seeing people having some frailties. So the early frailties, some activities of daily living that you may need some assistance with. And then you have the very frail that you normally associate with residents in a nursing home or retirement home with high care, or even in a community hospital. And then, of course, you have preparation for end of life. And end of life is not just about yourself, but about your family. And so as government, we want to enable people, not to disable them, through all these stages. So when a person is a senior, but full of vitality and good health, enable them to continue working. So readjusting the retirement age, the re-employment age, and that's something we're doing in Singapore. Today you retire at 63, and by law you must be re-employed to 68. All right? And by the end of this decade, we'll raise it to 65 and 70 respectively, because people want to be able to work and feel empowered. If not work, volunteer and contribute. Then as you start getting some frailties, you want to make sure the person has got retirement adequacy, because you may have to be part-time or stop working. And so retirement adequacy, government support through compulsory savings, government top-ups, support for the lower income, even housing monetization. I'll share with that a little later, how we monetize the public housing in Singapore. In Singapore, 80% of Singaporeans live in government-built public housing. It's a public-private sector kind of market model. And then, of course, as you grow frail, having social care in the community that is provided by the people sector but funded by government, as well as nursing homes, and then hospice care, together with the legal framework to enable caregivers to make decisions on behalf of seniors who may have lost mental capacity. So that is, I see, the role of government, partnering the community.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We'll come back to the very interesting points you're alluded to now. But we'll take a little moment to go to the private sector. And Lard, what do you see are the innovative solutions in this longer time in retirement? You know, we, I think, again, statistically, our generation will live about 10 years more longer on average than our grandparents already, and 20 years with the improvement in mortality, despite the blimp that we've seen with COVID, about 20 years more than our great-grandparents. So how do we adapt to that from a financials point of view?
Yes, thank you, Martine, and thanks for having me on the panel. I'm running a life insurance and asset management industry across multiple markets, focused on helping people prepare for retirement and financially plan for that. Now, our industry, and our company was no different, have often portrayed longevity as a curse. You know, you will not have the money, but we have the solutions for you. So it's a curse, but it's not a curse. We should all embrace that longevity is a blessing. Now, it comes with very particular challenges, obviously. And we should not be naive about these challenges, but longevity in general is a blessing, provided that we build awareness and resilience with our customer base. And I think the way to do that, so we have a mantra. Our mantra of the company is to help people live their best lives. And that can mean something very different depending on your age, depending on your income, depending on your family situation. But helping people to live their best lives is what we aim to do. When it comes to the framework that we use for that, we use a framework in which we say, if we want to build awareness and more resilience with the customer base, then we think it's about three key things. First, it's about financial grip. Financial grip meaning that in a very early stage of your life, it is important that you start to be aware that you need to plan financially for the way how you wish to live your life. And your life will be very different than the classic three stages of going to school, going to work, and then retire. The longevity evolution, revolution maybe, is forcing us to think much different about these things. And therefore, you need to be aware and have financial grip. Warren Buffett, I think, who enjoys, by the way, his best life probably as a pretty, as a person who is demonstrating longevity, he said something very interesting. He said, do not save what's left after spending, but spend what's left after saving. So sitting down regularly at an early age, get into the habit of personal financial planning so that you know what you're doing. That's the first thing, financial grip. The second thing is about well-being. This morning I heard somebody say our health is our wealth, and I couldn't agree more. So continuously being aware and resilient and try to work on your physical and mental well-being so that your mindset allows you to keep up with the longevity and with the fact you're living longer and all the challenges that may bring, I think is very important. And then thirdly, the third element is about future self, which has to do with your ability to continuously learn skills and to adapt, to go back to school later in life or in certain stages in your life so that you can be productive, you can be a part of society in a productive manner, which will allow you to live longer successfully. And I think that's very important. Now, our company is doing a lot in that area, and we can talk about that later. But I think longevity is a blessing. It comes with a lot of challenges. We should not be naive about those, but it is our purpose to help everybody, not the few, but the many, to live their best lives.
Thanks, Lard. And again, alluded to a few solutions there that are available. Noura, you see it from the lens of the young generation. So how are they contemplating a life that could extend to 100 years?
So first of all, I think, as you say, longevity is a blessing. And I think the fact that people can live longer lives is fantastic. But we also have to speak about the quality of life, making sure that people live dignified lives, healthy lives, qualitative lives. And young people, many young people have a sense of uncertainty and concern for the future. Also when it comes to aging, they're aware that they could live up to 100 years or maybe even longer. And many young people are starting to think about what that means for how they plan their lives. But there's a couple of things to make sure that longevity is a blessing. I think there's a couple of things to inject into this conversation. First of all, we have to talk about the social contract and the systems level. Because how the conversation is going now is, let's make sure that we have a productive youthful workforce. This is going to be the solution to upholding our social systems, social security, pension systems. But we cannot have the starting point of the discussion be there. We also need to talk about the dignity of life throughout all life stages. Children, young people, middle-aged, seniors. And secondly, I think we need to look at new approaches because if we're being honest, the way that our demographic curve is bending, it's going to be a huge burden on the current young generation, but also future generations to uphold social systems. And if we want to upkeep the quality of our welfare systems, we need to look to new approaches to add in addition. One of these is migration. I know people don't like to talk about migration, but we have to talk about migration also as a solution. We have to talk about taxation systems, and we need to talk about responsibility also on the corporate and governance sectors. And thirdly, I think one of the things I hear all the time is, because this discussion is essentially also about intergenerational solidarity. If people are living longer lives, hopefully more equitable lives, we need to make sure that intergenerational solidarity is part of that. And many young people feel that the intergenerational solidarity is going in one direction. Yeah. It's going from young people to the elderly, but it's not going in the other direction. And we saw also, we've had now a couple of decades of so many crises where governments have gone into major debt to solve these challenges, essentially pushing the cost into the future. And we're happy to pay back in the future and now. But we also need to talk about which investments are we making in the current young generation, in their livelihoods, rights, opportunities. So please make the intergenerational solidarity and equity go in both directions. In terms of actions, there's obviously things you can do on the personal level in terms of financial planning. I think we need to also improve financial literacy in our education system, etc. But there's a responsibility on government and on the private sector that we cannot ignore. So those are some of the perspectives that I hear. And let's also try to be a bit innovative and radical in how we think. And can we make sure that this intergenerational dialogue, solidarity and equity goes in both directions? I think we have way better opportunities to deal with the long-term issues.
Well, thank you, Noura, and thank you for being here to ensure that this conversation is happening. We'll come back to it. Darryl, from financial health, you're a big employer too, so you have a large colleague base to take care of. So what are your current thinking and what are the type of strategies that you've seen to enable longer living?
So, Martine, it's such an interesting question. First of all, I tip my hat to the WEF for framing this as an important topic. I think it's probably an underdeveloped conversation, formally at least. I would say the framework that I find particularly interesting when we think about this conversation and this challenge, to me, it's this simultaneous transformation that's occurring on three different levels at the same time. One is longevity itself. We've talked about that, so I won't go there. But another is this concept of a complete paradigm shift from these defined life stages, Lard referred to some of them, to what I like to think about, whether it's our clients or whether it's our employees, Martine, as financial resiliency. So I'm going to come back to that. And then the third is this multi-generational approach that we've got within how we think about financing the longevity. So if I just pick on the two of those for a second, when I look at the paradigm shift, as I called it, so when you go back, we all remember, many of us in this room were exactly trained this way in a post-war world. You came through, as you said earlier, school, work, retirement. In fact, a lot of people probably had exact dates when those things were going to happen. I was going to go to school until now. I knew how much that was going to cost. I financed that. I work. I know how much I'm going to make. Then I'm going to retire. I know how much I need to retire, and that's it. And you probably had a defined contribution and a defined benefit at the time as well. So that's pretty easy. That's simple. You would probably tell me that's laughable. You know, that was, if you want to sort of live that way, you probably have to get a time machine and go back to the 90s. Right now, what we're seeing with all of the people that we deal with is that this is very fluid. This is a non-linear life where any of those events could be pulled forward. I could decide that I want to start working earlier. I could decide that I want to retire later. I could decide that I want to have various recommitments to careers as I reinvent myself. So all of this ends up having to be very fluid as you go through your planning. And it's exactly effectively the opposite of this modular set to life. Okay, so point one. Point two, multi-generational. Oh, by the way, on point one, I think we're woefully unprepared for this. Woefully unprepared. And I don't want to put a cloud in this. We can talk about solutions at some point in this conversation, I'm sure. But when we look at your company, has I think you call it the Retirement Readiness Index.
Yes.
8 is considered high. The world is at 6. 6 is 3/4 of 8 by my math. We're 3/4 ready or something like that. In my country, in Canada, it's also 6. When we look at our surveys, 80% of people over the age of 55 say that they don't even come close to having enough retirement income. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Not nearly enough, quote unquote, they will say. Mm-hmm. The WEF's done a bunch of work on this. 19 countries around the world, people are worried about it. So I think we're right to worry about it. When you look at the second point, though, on multi-generation, anyone want to take a guess? 18 to 29, Americans aged 18 to 29, how many of them live with their parents? What percentage? Anyone want to guess? 25, 45? 45. It's 50. Half of Americans age 18 to 29 live with their parents. So again, this notion of I'm 23 years old, I graduate, I go and get a house, I get married, I settle down, that's over. So that's over. Now, in that household, we're probably worried about elder care. We're worried about the commingling of the financing of those people, the 50% that are in the home as well. And what we saw through the pandemic is a whole bunch of estate planning acceleration at the same time. So all of this is happening at the same time as this 100-year question that you're asking. So 3 layers of complication. Those individually, I would argue, are complicated problems. When you compound them, I think this is a really, really interesting point. We're all working on solutions. We can talk about that if you want, but to me, that's how I frame the challenge.
Yeah, and one thing that's very important, actually, as you said, the WEF has set up this session, so thanks to that. We need longevity literacy. We need to understand what that means. When Darryl and I grew up, there were publicity on Canadian TV. There was an advertising for Freedom 55. This has been drilled into our head. That at 55, we could, if we did it well and worked with that particular insurance company, we would be on the beach or on wherever you dream of being when you're not working. It's been drilled in our psyche. It makes no sense nowadays, and I'm sharing your anxiety, Noura, of how do we provide dignity at every stage of life, because it's not possible that the younger generation can take care of 1 out of 5 person in age 16 above, and it's urgent. It's urgent. I mean, I'm struck by the number you're giving for Singapore of already by the end of the decade at 1 out of 4. So we need to change the way that we think about our own lives and how we will be constructing this financial security for ourselves, helping our kids to get their degree. I mean, 50% living at home, this is incredible. Access to housing, which is probably one of the number one asset of my generation in terms of financing their retirement years. If the younger generation's not accessing real estate or housing, how is this going to pan out for them? Anyway, I'm getting all anxious already. Now, if there's any questions from, there is from the audience, we'll start an exchange here. I think that's the most interesting way to go.
Thank you very much. Jan Verstreken from Hologic Women's Health Company. I have a question for Mr. Lee. When we think about, and I admire the fact that you are thinking forward so much, right? Well beyond horizons that many political leaders will think about. There was a French statesman, Adolphe Thiers, who said, "Gouverner, c'est prévoir." To govern is to foresee. It's not just to make decisions for today, it's to make decisions for tomorrow and for future generations. When we think about the topic of health is wealth, and the astonishing figures you are mentioning, right? 1 in 4, that's a 75% increase. When we think that directionally 80% of the cost an individual cares to a healthcare system comes after the age are 60, 65, plus the advances that medical technology is still bringing these days to even make it longer, we are probably talking, in the case of Singapore, of a doubling of the healthcare infrastructure and costs, right? It's not only a cost, it's also a resource question, right? And we know that in the medical field, resources and human resources are becoming scarce, and there's a competition for those as well. So just really curious to understand how you think about this. Sorry for a long question. And I think Singapore can be a role model for other countries thinking forward on this topic and help others as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Janos. I mean, let's be very clear. Singapore has been able to do what we've been able to do because we learn from the best around the world. We study other countries. They've been willing to share with us their journey. One example is Japan. We have Amy Kiyota, who pushed the Ibasho program in Japan very successfully. Of course, culturally there are differences, but there's a lot that we can learn. And we studied from Japan, we studied from Europe, we went around the world. And for us, you can call aging a tsunami, right? Silver tsunami. It's a big problem. It's going to overwhelm our public finances. It will burden the young. It will drag down the economy. Or you can see that as something that's coming and you embrace it. I think Lard is absolutely right. Recognize that there are challenges, but there are ways to ride that wave in a positive way. Workforce, the manpower situation in Singapore is very tight. And the key for us is to plan well and coordinate well. It's a blessing that we're a small city-state, so national policy and what happens on the ground, very short distance. And for us, the key is we want to continue to invest in the next generation, in childcare, education, do research, provide housing, but at the same time, recognize that spending for a much super-age society will go up. And some may say, let's try to bend the cost curve for health. I think there's some wishful thinking there, but you should try your best to contain healthcare expenditure. Singapore healthcare expenditure will go up significantly, simply because of longevity and a larger senior population. Our lifespan is 84, one of the highest in the world, but lifespan and health span may not coincide, right? So we have very central organization in partnership with the private sector with very good solutions and the people sector who can provide care on the ground. And so we have a ministerial committee on aging, which my colleague, the health minister, chairs. Many ministers are responsible for different aspects of preparation for aging. For example, I provide housing for seniors, and so I'm on the committee, as are many NGOs and the private sector, whom we consult closely. And we need to make sure that we marshal the resources needed for the infrastructure and the spending that longevity will bring. And we do our best not to borrow for expenditure. It is for us to find the revenues, including raising taxes and streamlining expenditure, and not to borrow for spending, whether it's on seniors or on other users today. We borrow for investment, because when we invest, the next generation should rightfully pay for part of the investment, especially if it's a lumpy investment. But we never borrow to spend on ourselves and expect the next generation to pay for us. Especially with a kind of demographic curve like that, many of you will see this, it's not sustainable. So good government coordination, working with the private sector for solutions, and then helping as many seniors remain healthy and active as possible. The worst thing is sit behind the TV and watch TV the whole day. All right, seniors feel very disempowered and it's a downward spiral. We've seen that on the ground. Keep healthy, keep active, and then start providing care along the way. But I think ultimately we need to make sure that the whole of government works together with the whole of the private sector and the people sector to prepare for active aging.
Yeah. Interesting to pivot into solutions. Is there any other? Yes, there's a question here. Microphone coming to you. Can you please stand up and state your name?
Hello, I'm Alexandra. I have two questions. First, as the biggest life insurance and health insurance in Poland, we did some researches, social researches, and then like events, something educational event to the people in Poland about what is important in case of longevity and what impact do we all have on our own lives and our close people, like families, communities, etc. And what strikes me, it was that people actually know what is important and know what has to be done, but they don't know priorities and they don't know how to start. This topic is overwhelming, and I thought maybe you have some thoughts about, because we also talk with our corporate clients as employers, because they have impact on a lot of people. So maybe there should be some special roles in different employers, different companies, like coaching on health, etc. What do you think about this? This is my first question. And the other one, if we have some special taxes for products like alcohol, cigarettes, etc., do we should, in terms of policies, have something like this in terms of junk food, etc.? Because it just killing or making really bad diseases in the future. And I think this is a great bill will to have pay in the future. So this is my two questions.
I'll go to Lard on the first question for sure. There's surveys that do indicate the highest level of trust is towards your employer, more than NGOs, more than governments, and definitely more than media. And therefore, I do believe it's government and employers, but the private sector can certainly play a role in literacy and support in certain programs. So, Lard, a few solution points on that.
Yes, Alexandra. Absolutely. And if we go to, there's a couple of things. First of all, there is the families that are struggling with finding the right priorities and sometimes are just not literate in how to deal with it. It's overwhelming. Interesting statistic here. There's 40 million middle-income households in the US. There's 3 trillion of a protection gap there. So people have there's a massive gap, even there's a massive gap, and it's a middle-income household, not even a lower-income households. So it starts with a range of education instruments that we offer to our clients in various markets in the world. And they range from basic financial household planning and how you need to do that. And we use technology a lot with apps and with tools so that families can actually do that interactively themselves and learn from it. That's one thing. Second thing we do is we have a very large distribution reach. In the US, for instance, we have a very distinctive agency network of 60,000 agents across North America that is combining all the technology that we have so we can educate families, etc. But at the same time, they have physical meetings and can sit down with them and do their financial planning and help them and support them with that. And yes, products and services will then be available to help them through it. Now, on the point of the employer-employee relationship, that's a very important one. Many people work, most people work, they work in companies, and it's very important for employers, if you're a good employer, to provide access to appropriate benefits, retirement benefits, but also benefits in the health space. It's important that in that relationship, the access is increased. The employer can work on that, but we also need governments to work on that. In the US, the Secure Act, Secure Act 2.0 is improving the access, and access has to do with people that can enroll. The tax credits that they get are increased so that the employer can really be a trusted place to build those savings over time and to have those health benefits. Now, the unfortunate thing is that there's not many people that wake up on a Saturday morning and say, come on, honey, let's buy some life insurance. You simply don't, you know it, right? So making it an engaging, simple conversation requires a lot more things. It's a field where there's a lot of complexity. It's boring. It's a lot of glossary that people don't get, which I understand. And we are, by the way, the culprits of that. We should simplify everything as much as we can, talk in simple, plain language, and also make sure that we create engagement early on. So in the UK, for instance, we have a concept called pension geeks. And this is basically a range of engagement tools that we have so that employers can engage with their employees in a very exciting and fun way about something that feels a bit boring, especially for younger people to like planning for retirement. Come on, I'm just starting my work, right? And those are the kind of solutions that we bring. I think indeed the employee relationship is critical. Governments need to really do their work to provide access and to improve the access. I think that is access that is critical. And then, what we can do in the private sector is with the range of expertise and technology investments that we have and face-to-face advice, make sure we're sitting at the kitchen table and be of help there.
I think technology is our friend definitely now.
Absolutely.
In terms of leveraging to simplify communication, giving easier access. And Noura, you have a point to add.
Yeah. a little bit on the longevity literacy, because it's not as simple as just saying, now we have 30 minutes every month to plan for longevity and plan your life. That's not, the realities of people is stagnant wages, people can't afford to save money. We're in a cost of living crisis. Young people have no access to housing, no rental housing, and they don't have enough earnings or savings to buy properties. Many young people don't even know if they will ever own a property. So this is the reality. People are in their daily crises trying to feed their families and themselves and to put roof over their heads. Of course, people don't have time or even the foresight to plan for 30, 40, 50, maybe even 70, 80 years into the future. So I think we have to, it's of course way more difficult to solve that crisis than to solve longevity literacy. But I think we have to start there. And on the employer side, there's a responsibility. Stagnant wages, there has absolutely not been a reason for the stagnant wages that we've seen with economic development that we've seen in the past decades. And that's a responsibility employers can take to make sure that their employees actually have financial freedom to save money and take this personal responsibility. But if you don't have the space to do it, how are you going to plan and save?
And we've been working with the WEF on the Good Work Framework, and it does start, there's 5 principles, and the first one is fair wages and living wage. So I think it's work that is progress, but we're nowhere near done. Diversity as well, and inclusion in terms of access to it, that opens access to more. We haven't touched on your second one. Anyone wants to take that one in terms of bad food and fast food? Impact on longer life. Maybe it's one of the solutions.
Well, it raises money for governments. This would raise money. The only thing we can say, of course, is that this would raise money if you would tax those kind of products. It would raise money, provided the consumer is still buying them. Raise money for governments that they can then use to either improve fund healthcare systems in a better way, or to so there's potential there. But then I don't have a.
Martine, if I may,
Darryl, please.
I'm not particularly qualified to figure out policy around junk food, but I do agree directionally with you and you. I just want to come back quickly on the prior point, though, on education, because I agree with what my fellow panelists have said, and I think there's one bit missing, which is this financial literacy and the education component that we have a responsibility for with our own employees as large employers, as well as the communities at large, I think is very important. And I think it's also important to touch on the fact that single channel communication and education, particularly through social apps, is not enough. And I don't have a dog in this fight, by the way, because we have products, whether you want to do self-serve, we have products, whether you want to do full-serve advice, great advisors like Lard has and we have and lots of other companies have. But in a world that's increasingly complex, Alexandra, to me, the answer to your question isn't going to be solved by 2 clicks. And I'm off to the races because I'm busy. I've got a lot of other things to do. So the more we can do to educate and encourage people to have advisors in their life and understand that the multi-channel solution to multivariable problems is a way to success is really important. And I'm worried about it because I'm worried that there's a generation who do live by 2 clicks, and then ultimately you wake up, it's 10, 15 years later, and you actually never got on the right path in the first place.
Can I pick up on one small thing quickly on what Noura said? It's a solution. I'll promise you this. So one of the elements you mentioned, and I understand and I agree with it, is about affordable housing, for instance, as one of the elements. I think the private sector here can help as well in collaboration with government. So I think that a lot of solutions can be found where various parties are focusing on their own role that they have to play, whether they are governments, employers, whether they are private sector. But the collaboration together can actually be very, very powerful. One example of this is affordable housing. In the US, for instance, our company is not only having a lot of premium income, we're a large institutional investor, and one of the investments that we're doing is investing in affordable housing. Now, why is that attractive, and why can we also attract other investors to do that? because in the US there is a design from the government to make these investments in affordable housing actually attractive for investors to do. So if you combine and collaborate appropriately, then you can create more affordable housing, for instance. I know it's a tiny piece of the solutions, but there are solution spaces, not only by doing our own job better and well in this, but also collaborating very, very much with government and with other actors in this field to address these challenges.
Yeah, and there's a role of government and policy as well in terms of the fluidity of living your life in that kind of more agile way, because we find ourselves very often faced with very rigid fiscal policies that have been set for the 1970s, where the world is completely changing. So, for example, we were able to get a change in the US regulation to help employers wanting to help their young population pay down student debt. And we know it's a huge issue in the US. And therefore, we were able to redirect some 401k, DC savings type of investment to the employee themselves, pay down their debt, and the employer matches it up in their retirement savings, so that helps them in both ways. But that was not permissible by law until we advocated and lobbied for it. So we need that flexibility at all ends and forget this life of three module. A lot of our fiscal policies are facilitating this and now have become in the way. People at older ages who want to continue working need to leave money on the table by earning wages, which makes no sense. So we need to keep on it so that we find different ways to keep people active, keep people contributing to the tax base, so that we can not all of the burden comes on the younger generation, because it's scary as well, because at the older end of life you're more vulnerable as well. Yes. That the help will be directed there for human decency as well. So let's continue on the solutions path so that we don't end up too depressed. We have many questions coming. Not a lot of time on the clock, so very quick question.
I'll try my best with a very quick question. My name is Lennart Everveen. I'm part of the Global Shapers of the Frankfurt Hub, and personally, I'm in the humanitarian space and advocate for a more human rights-based approach to migration in Europe. And migration was mentioned as a solution. Today, migration, though, is mainly approached by the Commission from a lens of securitization, in some areas to the point of endangering the rule of law in terms of the right for asylum and even the prohibition of torture. Yeah. My question is to you, Mr. Friese. In light of these challenges to society, on one hand, our democratic values, on the other, the risk to the social contract, do we not need a more welcoming, integration-focused approach? And what can the private sector do to accelerate this transition?
Thank you. And yeah, it's a tough one in 30 seconds.
Yeah, so quite frankly, this is a massive topic that you're raising, a massive topic. I'm Dutch, and I come from a small country. Actually, the population growth of the last year was largely due to migration. And we should welcome them, because if you look at the demographics, it's actually very necessary to have, let's say, the productivity as a country, etc. But it's a very big topic. I think it would not do it justice by giving very simple, short answers in 10 seconds.
Well, yeah, and thank you for raising the issue and the worry. We need another session.
Oh, yeah.
So in the interest of time, I want to just finish up and close us by having a quick rapid fire, 30 seconds from each of my panelists to tell us, when it comes to longer lives, what's their key priorities in 2023, whether it's personal or professional? Darryl, will start with you.
Mine's innovation. I think that what got us here is not going to get us to the future. There's some solutions we've talked about here. We're working on many. If you look at employee ownership trusts, for example, in the United States, where we can transfer shares of a company into a trust and we can therefore distribute to, we're a big lender to that. We should do that in Canada. We're working on that legislatively. The point, though, is innovation. Don't think about all of the techniques that got us here today. Wide open to all sorts of new ways of doing things.
Thank you, Darryl. Noura, your rallying cry.
Private or more professional?
As you wish.
So, private one, I would say invest in your health and mental health, but on a more, in the day-to-day work, I would say let's foster intergenerational equity and solidarity. And don't underestimate the bond that is between the two groups in society who face the most age-based discrimination, seniors and young people. So working on strengthening that collaboration.
Very good. Lard.
Continue to invest in reaching out to all our customers everywhere to help them get a better grip, improve their well-being, and help them to work on their future self. Finally, if we are living longer, we better take better care of this planet.
That's true.
Because we're going to spend more time on it.
Desmond.
So just 3 points. First, to continue to innovate in solutions for active aging. I want to address the point about housing. Housing is social policy in Singapore. 80% of our people live in public housing. Home ownership is 90%. And we're innovating on housing for aging. Housing and care, community care apartments. You live, but in a place that comes with social and health care. We integrate the housing so that seniors live with services vertically integrated. Second, seniors need last mile navigation, not just education and financial literacy, but also all the programs in the public and private sector available for seniors. So we have a government agency responsible for last mile connection for all the social and healthcare needs of seniors. And we have a team that visits every person above the age of 60, at least once a year or twice, once over 2 years, to help them navigate. And there's a hotline. You call the AIC hotline, someone will be there to navigate for you all the government policies. And lastly, health, social and community are a triangle. We are pushing for better health, but we require social prescribing to enable people to avoid acute diseases that will lead to poorer quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you everyone for being interested in this topic.